Welcome back to GTD. We have another exciting episode of strictly NASCAR content because, let's face it, it's all that's happening right now. Spring training's off. We'll probably start coverage next week.
Ellie hit 2 home runs in a game.
Cubs are the best team in baseball.
This is the happiest we'll be all season.
Yeah. Apart from that, NASCAR, cars going around an oval. And it is an oval until this weekend, and we'll get into that later this week. But right now, Atlanta. You watched it. You know what happened. You have opinions. We have opinions. Here's what we think. Obviously, Christopher Bell won. Mm-hmm. We'll just get this out of the way. In a Toyota.
Yes.
We talked about there's no chance Toyota's going to win this race. Of course, Toyota wins. Yeah. Still, though, only led one lap. The only one that mattered. I think the only other Toyota to lead a lap was Bubba Wallace, and it was single digits. And every time he got up there, immediately steamrolled by a Ford or the Chevys at the end.
Yeah, I think everyone who watched that race will still agree that the Fords were the quickest cars. And for most of that race, obviously, Denny Hamlin flirted with the back half of the top 10 at the end of the race. Briscoe was never really anywhere. He led for a little bit, but that was based on pit strategy. Yeah. Ty Gibbs was nowhere. Tyler Reddick was in the back half of the top 10 for most of the day. And then Legacy Motor Club is Legacy Motor Club, despite John Hunter making it through for a top 10 in the end. But Fords are still the fastest.
By the end, your contenders were out. I mean, Cindric was out. Byron was out. Chase Elliott was out. Blaney spun out.
Blaney can't finish fourth.
So. But by that time, a lot of your contenders were, on the IR, we'll call it.
On the IR.
But yeah, so now the finish, the biggest storyline. Kind of go in reverse order here. What are your thoughts on the caution coming out?
I get why they did it. I think you have to really take driver safety into account here because I think when people hear, race back to the line, it's not like they're going to fly all the way around the track again. You don't think about the guys that are behind the wreck when the wreck happens, that are still trying to get positions on the way to the line. I think that's the more dangerous aspect of it that people might not be considering as much. Now, granted, when you look at how Daytona ended and then how the Xfinity race had ended the previous day at Atlanta where everyone all crashed into each other and they said a race back to the line, that's where I think you have the problem with it's just classic inconsistency. And I know NASCAR came out after the Xfinity race and profusely apologized, like, we'll never let this happen again. We're going to throw the caution if this happens again. But also, not a ton. I think people underestimate the amount of Sunday Sprint Cup watching fans are tuned into anything that happens with the Xfinity race.
Yeah.
And there's not enough people that hear that comment. So all the just casual NASCAR fan is seeing is inconsistency. And I do think at the end of the day, if you leave this a gray area, you're going to have this problem.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I think that the issue, because we were at the race, we were at the track, so we got to hear the fan interactions, how the fans reacted to that call in the moment, right? And it was almost to the point Bell wasn't even getting cheers for winning because everyone was just so deflated. And I think that only happens because of Daytona. And a lot of the fans that would go to the races are in tune. I'm not saying they watch the Xfinity race, but they're in tune with Bob Pockrass on Twitter and other guys, and they get updates. But a lot of them, like you said, just watch the Cup races, and so it's really Daytona. If they had flagged Daytona, I don't think you see the outcry that you see today. I know you don't see the outcry you see today and yesterday.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get why they did it. I don't think we're gonna go back to the old days of racing back to the line. I think yesterday they proved we're throwing cautions. The 500 was the 500. That was an isolated event. We're going back to cautions.
Yeah, and also you look at something like this, and you mentioned the fans in the stands. It wasn't even that the fans were booing NASCAR or anything. It was just kind of resignation, like, oh, well, this again.
Yeah, but also that's a credit to Atlanta for just putting on some of the greatest racing in what would have been another great finish. That's a credit to Atlanta just being awesome racing, and you saw the racing. It was great racing.
Yeah, NASCAR is kind of a victim of Atlanta, the way Atlanta works too here, because I think most of the time you're not going to have three cars side by side as the last lap wreck happens. Yeah. Like if this is a normal mile and a half, if this is a short track, I don't think it's as deflating because someone is probably in the lead at least, like solidly in the lead, and so that three-wide moment kind of both helped and hurt NASCAR, and that, especially when it's at the same track. You had this huge three-wide run to the line last year with Busch, Suarez, and Blaney. But let's talk about the move that sent those guys three-wide and the guy responsible. I was
about to say, let's talk about the guy.
Yes.
I was fifth in line, by the way. It was Ross Chastain, Ryan Blaney, Kyle Busch, AJ Allmendinger showed up. I'm not sure why he was there. And then it was me. But I just wanted to congratulate him because I like it. I think I told him after the race last night, and it makes sense. This is very early shades of Ross Chastain. Ross Chastain's his mentor in the Cup Series. Makes sense, both Chevy drivers. What happened with Ross Chastain, I don't want to happen and don't think will happen with Carson Hocevar. Carson Hocevar seems to be owning it on his chest, and that's just who he is. He said he needs to learn. Yes, he does. We'll get to the points that some of the drivers made and how they're all right pretty much. But I don't want this to turn into he gets ridiculed so hard he quits driving aggressively like you saw with Ross Chastain and his fall off a little bit.
Yeah, and I hopped in Carson Hocevar's Twitch stream last night just to see what he was talking about when he got back. And his personality didn't seem like he's going to dial it back at all. He's like, that's me, that's how I race, which I think is good for the sport. You need guys like that who are going to go out. And I was talking to you about this a lot last night as we drove back from Atlanta, where there's a difference between, because let's face it, all the drivers that come up now have money. You don't have any real guys that just make it there purely of their own skill, and their family has no money to speak of. 99.99% of the time, it's guys with money that are in this spot. So there's a very big difference between guys who are just out there wrecking cars for fun because they know their family can afford to pay for it, and guys who are out there driving aggressively and maybe even too aggressively sometimes, let's be honest, aggressively sometimes, but they have the talent to where you aren't like, oh, they're just being a ballistic missile and taking out everyone. And I think Carson's been on each side of that line a little bit, crossed it way too far at that one truck championship race a couple years ago where he took out Corey Heim for basically fun. And I think you've seen it calm down a little bit since then to where he's more, it's just aggression. And the aggression can go too far, but also if you watch him in Atlanta, I don't think the aggression really went too far that much. It was a lot of big pushes. Yeah. The two that stand out to me are when he hit Blaney into the corner. I think that's too far. You can't push there, which is something that Blaney mentioned when he was interviewed after.
Well, time out. You say that, but ultimately, that's what gave Bell the win.
But it's a different spot of the track. He pushed
Blaney. I also think it's different on the last lap. I think
you look at where he got into Blaney, and they are basically in the corner. Like, he's pushing him in the corner, whereas Belly hit Bell down the backstretch. Yeah. So even though it looks similar, it's vastly different in my opinion. And then there was one instance off of turn 4 where I turned to you and said, oh, Hocevar just made a hole there when there wasn't a spot. I don't remember who it was in front of. I think it might have been one of the Hendrick cars, but slid up into that spot. And it's just hyper-aggression, like I've said. Now, the move into turn 3 that Ross Chastain was upset about is when Hocevar did not go with Chastain, shot the middle, and it ended up working out for him. And if you're Ross Chastain, I get why you're upset with that, but also that doesn't feel like a thing you need to confront a guy about because you're racing.
Yeah, text him, call him later.
Yeah, it's overtime. You're racing for the win. Of course he's not going to sit behind with you if he has a run that he thinks he can get the lead with. So I don't get why Ross is upset. I do get why Ryan Blaney's upset because I think that move was overboard. He should not push a guy at that spot in the corner.
I think Ryan Blaney was the perfect amount of upset. He wasn't trying to fight him. Yeah. He had a man-to-man conversation like, hey, just learn. This is a learning curve. I know you're young. Let's not do this anymore.
And I liked what Kyle Busch said as well.
I really like what Kyle Busch said.
Kyle Busch is very calm and composing. He's like, hey, he just steps over the line too much. He's got a ton of talent, but he's over the line a little too much sometimes. And if he wants to really take that next step, he's going to have to dial it back a little bit. And of all people, for Kyle Busch to be saying that, I think maybe Kyle's seeing a little bit of his younger self in Hocevar in that moment. Yeah, so I think just like you said, everyone really had good points. And
I think the best point was what Busch said after that. Hocevar said this in his interview. Mm-hmm. I run last every week. Exactly. I had a car good enough to win. I'm going to try to do everything in my power to get this car, to get this team, get my guys, get my fans into victory lane.
Yeah.
I don't hate that at all.
As Kyle Busch himself once said, if you don't like that kind of racing, don't even watch. Which exactly. I very much agree with. I'm
glad you said racing because let's talk about it.
Yes.
This feels similar to fall or spring last year. Feels different a little bit than summer last year. That obviously the playoffs are a factor in that. Mm-hmm. But the racing just felt like half Talladega, half Las Vegas. Just a really fast mile and a half track.
I like this a lot. I think NASCAR will never be able to replicate this product at a traditional super speedway. I don't think. It doesn't work with how big Daytona and Talladega are. But this is what I think everyone wants super speedway racing to be. There are packs The cars are close. You can build runs, but it takes skill to use the runs correctly. You saw it on Saturday in the truck race. Kyle Busch masterfully controlling those lanes to win that race. In Xfinity, Austin Hill, he is so good at super speedway racing. Managed to control it again, although don't know what Justin Allgaier was doing by not blocking him. And then on Sunday, you saw it with the Fords for much of the race. Austin Cindric, Joey Logano, Josh Berry even controlling the lines back and forth. And then if anyone tried to go for runs, you had to be careful because if you went to the bottom and your run didn't work, you went to the back.
Yeah.
And you had to have help down there. And it's the fact that you can make individual car moves. That's not something you can do at a traditional super speedway, but the gaps open up enough in the corners you can't just stick together, and the cars handle just badly enough to where they're slipping and sliding a little bit, and you can make a one-car pass if you need to.
Yeah, and my favorite thing, the teamwork. Teamwork was... I mean, you looked at me at one point. We're like, is tandem drafting back?
And it wasn't collusion teamwork, where all the manufacturers
Yeah,
just sit in the line and go, we're not moving.
It was just the guy behind you had a run. You felt a run coming. You felt him. You kind of saw him in your mirror coming at you, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna use his run and amplify my run and go down to the bottom, or even go up around on the outside. We saw middle of the corner all day, but mostly what we saw was going into the corner, especially towards the end of stage 3. I think Chastain did it probably the most.
Yeah.
But just the switchbacks, just right into turn 3 or turn 1, boom, dive to the inside, and then just hold on to it and let it stick. And it was beautiful teamwork. And like he said, not just with like Hendrick on Hendrick or Penske on Penske, although Penske is Penske at super speedways right now.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that, but those cars are just incredible. But just cars using runs from other cars and using their own run, and just really having to maybe I'm going to call it the most cerebral super speedway racing on the calendar.
Well, that's why you see your good super speedway racers that were up front for a lot of the race, like Austin Cindric, who I think is one of the best super speedway racers in Cup right now, really controlled much of that race. And when you leave it more in the driver's hands, it's not because usually a typical super speedway, you're going to have guys that sit in the back and ride in the back. And then when it's time to go, they're like, oh, shoot, it's a next-gen car to super speedway. I can't do anything. But instead, you had Denny Hamlin, who's normally one of those guys that likes to ride the back, and he started actually making his way forward and ended up in the top 10 by the end of the race, at the end of the last stage. So it's that perfect mix of it's still pack racing, but also the driver can make the difference quicker and carve their way through the field if they know what they're doing, which I really like.
Yeah, and I brought up Penske. I feel like we have to touch on them again this week. The Fords look fast. I mean, Josh Berry was up there. Penske car. Josh Berry was up there a lot. But I think Cindric had the fastest car.
Yeah.
There's a good chance he wins if Larson doesn't. It happens. I'm not putting. I mean, yes, it's Larson's fault. How often does he do that?
I don't know. A lot.
Yeah.
Larson runs people into the wall a lot, and no one cares because he's Kyle Larson and he's NASCAR's like, this is our best driver in the world, and he races in our series. I think Larson. It's weird because he does a lot of these where it seems like he almost loses track of what's going on and kind of goes into a bubble at the end of these races. It's not hyper-aggression. I think it's like he forgets a guy's there. And it happens weirdly often with him. I'm not sure quite what it is, but you look at what happened with when Denny Hamlin hit Larson to the wall at Pocono. People hated Denny Hamlin for 6 months.
Yeah.
And now this happened. I think part of it might be because it happened to Austin Cindric, who I wouldn't say really has a hard, dedicated, big fan base at this point. And also with everything that happened with Hocevar, Larson's just getting lost in this. And it's been shuffled back. And I think this is worse than anything Hocevar did. Larson just walled him. Yeah. Straight up walled him.
I agree. I mean, if Hocevar had walled some guy, it'd be different. But yeah, Larson just I don't really think Cindric didn't really have a run. Larson still had the momentum. I mean, Cindric they were pretty even, but he didn't need to go up and block. I don't know if he was trying to block or just trying to run his line in turns 3 and 4. But yeah, not a great look.
When they were in the middle of the corner, if you listen to his onboard, his spotter said clear up top. And then Larson started to drift, but at that point, there's still like a lane and a half between them. Yeah. And then his spotter goes, still there, still there, still there, still there, and Larson keeps going up, walls Cindric, and then says nothing.
That is a little confusing for your spotter to go clear.
I know,
and then say weird... still there. Like, maybe Larson's like still clear. Like you're saying still. So if I hear the word still, I'm gonna think nothing's changed.
He yelled still there like 6 times. Yeah. So it looks really bad on Larson because at the end of the day, you also you have mirrors
Yeah.
So I think there has to be a little bit of accountability there, and for whatever reason, it just never gets asked of Larson as much of other guys.
And I'm sure they've worked it out. I'm sure.
No,
they
I'm not
reached
saying
out to
there's
each
bad
other.
blood between
Yeah,
Larson and Cindric at all. I just think that if this was any other driver, if it had been Chase Elliott outside of Kyle Larson, everyone's talking about that today.
Yeah.
But just those two drivers, the way that incident went, or even if it's flipped, if Austin Cindric does that to Kyle Larson, it's still being talked about today.
Yeah.
So,
but back to Penske, they're dominant right now. They're
They
so
are.
fast. We'll see what happens. Especially, I mean, we're going to a drastic change from super speedways to road course this weekend. So we'll see what happens. I'm very curious to like Las Vegas and Phoenix. I'm very curious to those tracks because
road
maybe
courses are weird because I like weirdly think you might see Austin Cindric at the front for Penske again because I think he's the best road racer out of him, Logano or Blaney.
Yep, I agree.
He's a incredible super speedway racer. He's a really good road racer, but he's just nowhere near the other two at the other types of tracks right now, which it's a weird dynamic because you have Ryan Blaney, who is probably the most consistent overall driver in NASCAR right now. You have Joey Logano, who uses devil magic every other year. Yeah. And then you have Austin Cindric, who is like a hyper specialist at two out of your disciplines.
Young talent who's going to excel.
Penske is set up in a really good spot right now, I think. I'm curious to see what they do when Logano either moves on or retires. But overall for Atlanta, good racing once again. Absolutely great product. I think it's one of the best entertainment tracks in NASCAR right now.
If you haven't been in person, it's one of the best races to watch in person just because the TV can't show all the movement that's going on in Atlanta.
And if I was going to sit anywhere in Atlanta, where I would sit is the second bend in the quad oval because people love to hook the inside of that second bend in the quad oval, send it into turn one. It's one of the most popular places to make a move. So if you're going to Atlanta, maybe sit 15, 20 rows up at that second bend in the quad oval. You will not have a bad time, really anywhere you sit. But Atlanta was great again, as usual. Going to be in the summer, not at night again this year on a Saturday night, which is where the second race at Atlanta belongs, in my opinion. That is a summer night race.
We'll probably have green walls again.
Yes, I love the green wall. I'm a sucker for colored
green
walls.
Green walls are sweet.
I love colored walls. I'm one of the few people who wants to bring back the yellow walls at Charlotte still. He's not a fan, but... Yeah, that's pretty much it for Atlanta. Let us know your thoughts on the Carson Hocevar situation, anything else that happened in this race. What would you have done with the finish? And if you have any ideas that you want NASCAR to implement for the last lap, chuck them down in the comments. NASCAR won't see them, but we might talk about them. So thank you for tuning in. Picks for Coda will be out later this week. Check that out when that video drops. But thank you for tuning in again, and we will see you later.